I guess we're here with Mariano,
Hi.
who has been doing some research or has been had a talk at PETS, specifically related to some of the EU regulation that's come out, GDPR stuff. I know that you, originally 2 years ago, was it? You did an original study, and this is kind of like a follow-up piece of research. Can you kind of explain what you were doing in the original piece and what the second piece is as well?
Yeah, so sure. So in 2019, we did this experiment where we tried to see if the right of access of the GDPR, which is written in Article 15, which actually we tried to see if this right is implemented in the companies in a secure and safe way. So what we basically did is we...
Can you explain what that is,
yeah.
right of access?
So the right of access allows you, as any individual in the EU, to request your personal information from any company. So let's say I have money on my bank account, I would like to know what kind of personal information my bank holds about me. I can basically ask the bank, like for instance by sending an email to that bank, say like, hey, I'm Mariano Di Martino, I would like to get all my personal information. But of course, the problem there is that the bank has to kind of verify you. They have to verify whether or not you're the person that's really requesting the data. So in our experiment in 2019, what we did is we contacted, I think, 50 or 55 organizations, and we tried to see like how are they implementing this right, like how are they implementing the right of access. And then we noticed that a lot of them did it in very insecure ways and in very unsafe practices, basically. And yeah, so we tried to make sure that we kind of were someone else, so we tried to ask information from a colleague instead of ourselves. And we did that by doing a lot of social engineering stuff. For instance, we tried to convince the company to say like, hey, my account got hacked, and that's why I don't have access to my original email address. That's why I'm sending this from a different email address, for instance.
So you did this with your research colleagues, did you?
Yeah, so we did this with our colleague. In 2019, we did it with like one colleague.
Yeah.
And we also said stuff like, well, we photoshopped ID cards. So we said like, we take a picture of our own ID card, and then we try to find on social media, like what's the name of our colleague, what's the date of birth, can we find maybe a profile picture of like Instagram or like Facebook, for instance. And then we try to Photoshop that on the ID card and try to see if companies believe that it was a real person. And many of them, like almost all of them that we, or at least all of them that requested an ID card kind of believed that it was real and tried to give us, or like at least gave us the data from the other colleague that we impersonated, basically.
So in 2019, what were kind of the results that you found? What were some of the most surprising organizations that gave up data, and what was like the nature of that data that they were giving up to you with that personal data request?
So there were like, we contacted a wide range of companies, right? Like from the entertainment industry to like financial companies, for instance. But I think the most noteworthy companies were probably financial companies, because they're usually, I mean, they're used to handle ID cards, right? Because if you want to open a bank account, you would like to, this company, like usually banks or like insurance companies, they usually require some kind of ID card to like check if you're real and so forth. But they try to transfer the same process of being physically in the room and trying to hand over an ID card, a real ID card, to like the digital variant, to like implement this right of access. Which of course is not a very safe way, because like a digital, I mean, a real ID card, if you try to copy it, if you try to scan it, it like has those weird patterns in it.
Features.
Like, yeah, those features. So you can like easily at least copy them. While, of course, a digital ID card, a photocopy of an ID card, you could easily Photoshop that, right? So those companies, when we try to contact them and try to use Photoshop ID cards, and then it's, I mean, not all of them, but many of them, we succeeded in like getting data from a colleague, and of data kind of contained financial transaction, like what kind of payments they did to, like, for instance, when our colleague went to some kind of restaurant, we knew like exactly which restaurant, like how much they paid, because it was all written in the record base.
So like full transaction history.
Exactly, full transaction, everything that you could see in your like banking app, basically.
Yeah, okay. And so you got that data in the first place in 2019. Now you've done a follow-up study, and can you explain what you were trying to look for in this follow-up study?
Yeah, sure. So in 2021, back in 2019, when those companies were vulnerable, we tried to contact them. We said like, hey, this is what you have done. This is a very insecure way of implementing the right of access. And then we tried to see like, okay, these are these countermeasures or like suggestions to say it in a better way, please implement those, and that way you would have like a more, or at least less risk of like leaking this kind of data from the person. And then in 2021, we tried to do it again with this work. We tried to see like, okay, we are just going to contact all these companies again and try to see if they have somehow fixed their policy or like try to make it more secure. And then when we did that, we noticed that there were more companies vulnerable afterwards, like this year, than they were in 2019. And even companies that weren't vulnerable in 2019, but were now. So that's kind of a very worrying thing to see.
So they didn't seem to implement your suggestions that you provided them, or some of the companies from 2019 did?
Yeah, so some of them did. Some of them implemented suggestions, and the companies that did were actually the companies that were, at least that we think were mostly interested in our suggestions. So we had some meetings in 2019 with like financial companies that basically said like, yeah, we really want to fix this. We really want to make sure our policies are secure. And those companies were safe. So those companies, they didn't implement all our suggestions, but enough to at least make it through our threat model that we kind of set up. But many companies that even said that they would implement it somehow didn't, or just did it in a very weird way, or like in a very insecure way.
And maybe it's time to name and shame some of the companies. Like, which best and worst? Like, could you name like some?
No,
of the
so like
companies?
unfortunately, there's like, I mean, there is this ethical part of it as well, because you don't want to name and shame companies. First of all, not because it's still an experiment, right? You do an experiment we just ethically set up. You're trying to make companies safer. You don't try to, of course, name and shame them. And also, the thing is that some companies, I would have said, some companies leaked data of other individuals.
Oh wow!
But it is sometimes it's in a way that if you like for instance, I'm Mariano Di Martino, right? And there are some other people that have the same name as I do.
Yeah. Okay.
And the fact is, even though we try to like get information from our colleague, sometimes our colleague had like a name that was maybe common, and if we then try to ask that data, we got really data from someone else with the same name.
Wow.
Of course, so we don't want that as well. I mean, it's a bad thing to have data from some colleague that you, of course, is participating in the experiment. It's even worse if you get it from someone else. But like, so to come back to the question, we don't do this name and shame. It's just to approve companies and their policy, of course.
Okay. And where do you think some of the future work is in this space? Like, I know you specifically looked at this attack where you were photoshopping identities and all of this stuff, but do you see like future directions that people could go in if they were interested in researching this space, or other works, interesting things that you found out while you were doing this that people could look into?
So I think mainly, I mean, there is a lot of work that's being done around the right of access, not only with trying to see if the policies are secure enough, but also trying to see like what kind of data those companies have, like what kind of data are they having, what kind of data are they sharing with you, what type of credentials are they asking? Like, are they asking, like I said, ID cards? Are they trying to call you? Because some companies try to call the subject, like they call like, hey, are you really doing this request? So those are things that are being done in future work, like even in prior work as well. But like more like for future work, I think it's important to actually understand why companies are still not implementing these kind of policies. So we did part of that in our study, in this work actually. We tried to do like interviews with these companies, with these DPOs of these companies that kind of handle the privacy department of their company, and try to understand their behavior, why they're not implementing such stuff. And it's usually because of, like, there's one thing, of course, like budgetary constraints, right? You don't, I mean, there are some stuff that takes some kind of time or like some kind of money as well to implement it correctly. That's one thing. But you also have the thing that where some companies are just not able to implement it that way, because there is this kind of balance you have to strike between having secure and safe policies at the same time, but also trying to not have a large burden on the individual itself. Like, let's say I try to get my data from my bank, and my bank is like really asking me all these questions like this. They're trying to ask for my ID card, they're trying to call me, trying to say where I live and all this kind of stuff. You of course, like the only thing you want as a normal individual is just getting your data from the bank, right? But if you have to really provide them even more data, like even more data that maybe that company doesn't even have the data of you. Like let's say I contact an entertainment company and they say like, yeah, you want your data, fine, but we have to make sure it's you, right? And you send a photocopy of your ID card, and it still has this national register number, like social security number in the US. Well, maybe that entertainment company doesn't have that number, but you don't know, because that's what you're asking, right? So if you're just going to give them more and more data, that's not a good solution as well, because then you're just trying to it's kind of doing it the wrong way, I think. So it's important to like strike a balance between those two, trying to ask the right things, like the correct things that are not that sensitive, but still make you, or at least make the company able to verify your identity in a correct way. Like the best solution would be to have some kind of automated process.
Okay.
So let's say, of course, big companies like Google and Facebook, they all have these processes because they have a lot of money to implement them. But how they usually work is you just have to log in with your username and password, and you can log in and then get your data that way.
Yeah.
But money companies don't have a username or password. Like if I know, let's say there is some kind of analytical company that has data of you, but you don't have an account on a website. How are you going to verify that? Are you going to call them, or are you going to ask for ID card? So that's kind of a problem that is like in the cross intersection of like legal stuff and also like technical computer science stuff.
Is there any shout outs that you want to give to like co-authors or people that worked on this research with you?
Sure. So of course, the research I did was not like only done by me, of course. There were like a lot of colleagues and co-authors that participated in the experiment. Of course, I would give a shout out to all the co-authors that were on the paper. We worked together with the legal department of the UHustled, which is basically the university I work for, and EDM as well. So like, yeah, of course, all the shout out to the people that worked together with us.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks guys, and hope you enjoyed this little chat with Mariano.
Thank you.